The Amsterdam Torture Museum, episode 5 of part 2. This is our concluding segment. We left off with this instrument of torture for interrogation, the Judas cradle. As you can see, the victim is hoisted by the forces of nature, gravity, allowing the executioner to maneuver, balance, lower the victim onto this pyramid, where the point of this metal frame is intended to deliver intense and prolonged pain. But there's more to the story. The Judas cradle. These pyramid-shaped shears symbolize the supreme accusation around which all witch trials revolved. The sexual and, in the case of males, homosexual intercourse with the devil. According to the theory of demonology, this constituted a secret source of witch power. Only the most excruciating form of torture could break its force. When applying the hoisting shears, the executioner could vary the measure of pain as he thought fit, in proportion to the degree of suspicion, particularly in direct confrontation with the evil one. Torture was a matter of utmost precision. In this respect, the Judas cradle was regarded as one of the most reliable torture instruments. One more look. Forces of nature, gravity, along with weighted blocks of concrete that would intensify this pain. Now let's gaze at this object for a moment. Try to imagine what this might very well be used for. Perhaps the executioner could place the head of the victim in this vise around the skull and gradually tighten, lowering this vise, crushing the skull, meanwhile being interrogated. And that's what it is. This is the skull cracker. The chief difficulty in heresy trials consisted of providing proof that the crime actually had been committed. After all, the atrocity exclusively involved the nourishing of an inner conviction. This vice-like equipment enabled the demonic mind of the accused heretic to be excruciated. In the eyes of the church, heresy was high treason against the divine ruler. With meticulous precision, theologians had listed a great variety of heretical thoughts. The list was so exhaustive that there were so many possible potential violations. The skull cracker. I think it speaks for itself. Here we see some more instruments on display. Imagine what they might be used for. Well, the curators provide some text. Branding tongs. Mutilations of parts of the body with tongs and red-hot irons serve to indelibly impress upon the culprit the irreparable character of crimes once committed. Jurists referred to the scriptural passage, if thy hand offended thee, cut it off. If thine eye offend thee, pluck it out. This was used on thieves, on spies. The degrading punishment not only served as retribution, but prevented a repetition of criminal activity, leaving the marks of Cain until death. And I think we have some illustrations of how you see in the context of the crowd, you see what he's doing here is with this mallet and this chisel is this is capable of removing hands or fingers. Okay? A lot of violence being distributed. And here's how those instruments looked on display. So again, this would be used along with a mallet to remove fingers. Hot tongs. They'd be placed in an open fire and then allow the executioner to pinch sensitive parts of the body. So there's this overlay of punishing perceived sexual transgressions. Theory of the body. Previous episodes we talked about that. Known as the claw. Served to brand the sinner. Used by witch hunters suspecting women of having sexual intercourse with the evil one, the devil. So we see a lot of return to these religious, quasi-moral paradigms. As you can see, it's a vice-like grip, panorama of violence. This is important for us to understand the range in which the forces of nature can be utilized to dispense punishment. Drowning. And we have some explanation. In the Middle Ages, the water test was not a method of torture, but a magic manner of providing proof. If the accused remained afloat, it would be a sign of guilt. The purging stream would not accept him. With the rise of judicial torture in the 16th century, such trials by ordeal were regarded as acts of superstition and prohibited in large parts of Europe. Yet jurists continued to attach importance to the purifying force of water. Drowning was a common death penalty, particularly for women. The sentence was often executed symbolically. Petty frauds, for instance, could count on a humiliating bath in the river. The purifying force of water, pollution, eradicating pollution from the community. Again, drowning. Quartering. Quartering refers to a method of execution that famously was inflicted on Robert Damiens, who attempted to assassinate the King of France. He was placed in public square in Paris, and 4 horses were harnessed to rip him apart in different directions of the compass. The saw. Now, this saw was used to cut the body in half, but not in a way you might think. The body would actually be held upside down, secured to a frame, and this timber axe often required the use of two men, so it had four handles, two men, and would saw the victim in half in this direction. Now, one of the reasons why the victim would be held upside down is to maintain blood flow. So this was not a form of death that was instantaneous. It was prolonged agony. And we have the guillotine. Introduced, although not invented, by Joseph Guillotine in Paris, the national meeting, the National Assembly. Wanted to abolish a whole range of different tortures, and then introduced the guillotine with its infallible precision of modern technology. Now we see a shift away from the forces of nature and into modern society in which technology is actually developed. The machine inspired more horror than previous instruments of torture altogether. A symbolic statement about equality in the new French Republic. I think we have famous inscription. Heads being displayed in the public spectacle. Here we see. Apparently this is the real deal, so we're adding authenticity to the exhibit. The blade of justice, as they say in France. And this is the King of France, who met his fate before thousands of Parisians, revolutionaries. The king is dead. And so finally, the conclusion. Anyone reading newspapers will know that torture has never been banished. In their persecution of political dissidents, the security forces of authoritarian regimes had little to learn from the Spanish Inquisition of older times. Yet, even in the center of Western democracy, executioners have remained in employment in the United States of America, the very country where the Constitution first guaranteed protections against violating human life by way of death sentences. In certain states in the U.S., the convict has the right to choose the bullet, the gas chamber, the needle, the electric chair, although those methods have now been determined by the legislature. But the question is this progress? And consider the number of people calling out for the reintroduction of the death penalty these days. Is the modern public so different from the masses cheering the executioner in the past? And it is with that we conclude the Prison and Torture Museum of Amsterdam.